time for us to move on now. Thank you very much,
You're an aviation consultant and former
Byerly.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Transportation Affairs. My first question is very simple. Are you overall concerned by the issue of global warming and its impact on the air transportation?
Merci, Sophie. Thanks first for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to be with such other distinguished panelists. That's great. Yeah, there's no greater challenge for aviation than climate change. And I'd say for two reasons, one moral, one practical. The moral reason is it's an obligation, given the impact of aviation, air transport on climate change, an obligation to ourselves, to our children, for generations to come. The existence of the planet is at risk. The second and very practical consideration is that for aviation itself, for its own future, airlines need to tackle their CO2 emissions, and they need to be perceived as doing so and doing so aggressively. I think the days are past. I used to hear this 20 years ago when I was at the State Department, when airline executives would say, we're already doing everything we can to address climate change because fuel is a major component of our costs, and of course we're trying to keep our fuel costs down, and that reduces emissions. Those days are past. That answer no longer works. So I think fortunately the industry around the world, including in the United States, has woken up to the need to do a lot more.
Would you say, John, that it has become a major issue with Biden's new administration?
Yes, absolutely. It's night and day from President Trump to President Biden on the issue of climate change. I think Joe Biden made crystal clear during his campaign for the presidency, and now that he's in the White House, has underscored his commitment to making climate change a top agenda item for his administration. He announced on the day he was inaugurated, January 20th of this year, inaugurated as president, that the United States is rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. He announced that he would be reinstating automobile fuel efficiency standards from the Obama administration that President Trump had watered down. He announced a total moratorium on new drilling for oil and gas on U.S. federal lands. And he's appointed a number of senior officials in his administration who are absolutely committed to addressing climate change. Chief among them, Pete Buttigieg, who is now the new U.S. Secretary of Transportation. He's made clear that climate change is at the top of his agenda as Secretary of Transportation. Indeed, in the first meeting he held with U.S. airline executives, CEOs, climate change was the subject that they discussed. Another factor I'd mention as the new acting assistant secretary for international aviation, Pete Buttigieg and President Biden have appointed Annie Petzonk, who is a recognized international expert in aviation and climate change, and who used to work for the Environmental Defense Fund before joining the administration. So I think all the actions that President Biden has taken in the couple months he's been in office underscore a very different and radically different approach from that of the Trump administration. That's good news.
Is that a good reason to be positive, to be optimistic?
I think from signals we're hearing from the U.S. industry in the most recent weeks, they've gotten the message. I think they were already doing some things. They're going to be doing more. For example, Federal Express, a huge cargo carrier worldwide, has announced its intention to be carbon neutral by 2040, and they've indicated they'll be modernizing their fleet. They'll be using sustainable aviation fuels. Likewise, over at United Airlines, one of the world's biggest passenger airlines, they intend to be carbon neutral by, I believe, 2050. They've mentioned the use of biofuels, but also a commitment to invest in carbon capture and sequestration. United's CEO, Scott Kirby, reaffirmed that commitment just this week at another conference. There are also some very important developments, or I think valuable developments, between several U.S. airlines and some very large companies like Microsoft and Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers, where those companies who want to address or offset the climate effects, the CO2 emissions of their corporate travel, have entered into agreements whereby they will do that offset through investments effectively in sustainable aviation fuels. And that's one of the things, I believe it's been made clear in earlier panels, that needs to happen. We need to have a better market and established supply chain for sustainable aviation fuels if they're to make a difference in the longer term.
I'm going to ask you, John, the same question that I asked Andrew, and I'm going to address this question to Bo and Fadi as well. Would you say that a decrease of air transportation is quite necessary today to address the global warming issue?
Let me respond by saying I think we will see a decrease in air transport. Look, the pandemic has devastated air travel. It's devastated the economics of airlines around the world, perhaps not so much in China. Chinese aviation seems to have bounced back, but everywhere else, numbers are down. I believe I saw figures that CO2 emissions from 2019 compared to 2020 are down by as much as 40%. I believe travel will come back as vaccination spreads, as people feel more comfortable traveling. We'll see a resurgence in air transport, more people getting on board planes. That will start small with, I think, folks visiting friends and family, relatives, travel to nearby locations, sunny spots in many cases, but nearby. Long-distance tourist and other travel will commence later, but I believe that business travel will see a long-term decrease. There's some who don't believe that, but I know the CEO of Lufthansa has suggested he believes business travel long-term will be down 10 to 20%. I've seen estimates as high as 1/3 of business travel would decrease, especially among a younger generation. I think of my son who's been working from home for over a year now using Zoom and Skype and other virtual platforms. It's evident that there's a different way to do business. You don't need to hop on a plane. You don't need to be a travel warrior, an airplane warrior to make your business succeed. So I think that businesses will see they've seen that it is possible to do business without constant air travel, and that it's cheaper, it's safer, and frankly, not having to travel among a lot of time zones, it's less exhausting. And as one who used to do that a lot,
yes.
I'd welcome the opportunity to do more business virtually.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.